Welcome back to the Law&Crime Network. I'm Heather Hansen, and this is the key witness in this trial that just started today. I want to bring in my guest, criminal defense attorney Matt Mangino, as we talk about this testimony and just how important this witness is. Good afternoon, Matt.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. What do you think thus far? We've got Brian Winchester on the stand. He is the key witness. He has immunity here. He is testifying against Denise, saying ultimately that she's the one that planned that murder. How important is it for the prosecution that he does well in this trial?
Well, it's extremely important because he is the conduit, so to speak, that brings everything together with regard to Jerry Williams' murder. So without his testimony, they don't have a case. It's very difficult to build a circumstantial case 18 years after the homicide occurred. So he's the key witness and the primary witness in this case.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me, Matt, that it's almost as if there is no case without Brian. You know, there is no, and the defense attorney made that quite clear in his opening, that there's nothing to tie Denise to this murder except for this testimony of a man who is in jail for 20 years for kidnapping her. If you're the prosecution, do you pursue this case against Denise?
Well, certainly, you know, there are some circumstantial issues that help build this case, that help tie it together. Obviously, the insurance policies, the relationship between Brian and Denise. But certainly, this case doesn't go forward without Brian Winchester's testimony.
Yeah, and one of the things that I always think about when I watch a witness like this is the defense attorneys must be just chomping at the bit to get after him for cross-examination. How, and when you're trying these types of cases where you've got one key witness who's going to make or break the case against your client, how excited and how much anticipation are you in prior to the opportunity to get up there and cross him?
Well, you know that your cross-examination may make or break this case. You know, the way you approach this witness and how you're able to show that there's some bias, that there's certainly Brian Winchester has something to gain by testifying here, but you also have the opportunity to really examine and attack his story and try to convince the jury that he's not being candid.
Well, let's see just how candid he is. We're going to take you right back to the courtroom. Welcome back to the Law&Crime Network. I'm Heather Hansen, and man, that was some riveting testimony from Brian Winchester, the person who murdered the victim in this case, and the person whose testimony really is the key factor in the case against Denise. I want to bring Matt back on with me. Matt, what did you think?
Wow, that was quite a line of testimony there. I mean, really twisted. You know, somehow Brian Winchester seems to be able to separate himself from what he did. You know, he talks in terms of Jerry Williams' death. You know, not his murder. He murdered him. He shot him in the face while he was holding on to a branch in the middle of a lake. It's really, you know, testimony that's hard to wrap your head around when you listen to it.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I want to go back to the testimony that had to do with the time period before the murder, when Winchester was talking about his affair with Denise, and the fact that he and Denise had this agreement that they weren't going to have sex with their own husband and wife and be sort of loyal to each other. Do you think that the jurors, now remember, we have a jury of 6 men and 6 women, which to me does make a difference in how these people are going to weigh this type of testimony. Do you think that the jury is thinking that these people just were sort of off the charts out there, and both of them had a lot of issues?
Well, certainly. I mean, it would be tough for a juror to sit there and try to put themselves in their place. I mean, they're talking about things like, well, we didn't want to have sex with our husband and wife, but we would check up on one another to make sure that that wasn't happening. You know, he talked in terms that he didn't want, he didn't want his child to grow up without a mother, but it was certainly all right for him to have Denise's child to grow up without a husband. I mean, the testimony is so bizarre and so strange that it's got to be difficult for the jurors to sit there and listen to this cold, calculated recitation of a year and a half's worth of plans. It's a crazy case.
Well, and the fact that he testified that she got cold feet, I think that if I were on the jury, well, first of all, I would be wondering why this guy hasn't been convicted for this crime. And I'm sure, you and I know that there's a plea agreement in place, and he has use immunity, which means that his testimony itself cannot be used against him. And since there's no other evidence out there to support a conviction, it probably means that he will never actually be convicted or do time for the murder. But the jury probably doesn't understand all of that, and you've got this guy just talking about murdering this guy and how he really, when Denise had cold feet, he was frustrated with her because he's like, well, duck season might end on us, and then we're not going to have this opportunity. Do you think that the jury could end up sort of using that against the prosecutor and saying, look, this guy did it, there's nothing to tie her except for this killer's words, and it's just not enough to overcome reasonable doubt?
Yeah, I think some of the things he said were interesting. He said, hey, this wasn't just Denise's plan. This was my plan. We talked about this together. We were equal partners in carrying this plan out. I mean, ultimately, he carried out the killing himself, but they were involved in the plan. I mean, they talked about other possibilities besides this boating or hunting accident. So this wasn't, something that, two lovers involved in a heated relationship all of a sudden decide, well, we're going to kill your husband. No, this was a very well planned and methodical. They looked at many different options here, and if you listen to what he said, there were certain nuances to their plan. Why they were going to, get his wife drunk the night before. I mean, this wasn't something done on a whim by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, we're going to take you right back to the courtroom, and we'll be right back. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're continuing to wait for trial to start back up so that Brian Winchester can continue to testify. And remember, he testified that he shot Mike Williams in the head. And now Denise Williams is on trial for allegedly conspiring to do that and for being an accessory after the fact, but also for the murder itself. Matt, I want to bring you back in on this. What do you think about these particular charges? Do you think that there's an overreach by the prosecutor in trying her for murder, and that they should have stuck with conspiracy and accessory?
Well, the prosecution wants to hold somebody accountable for Jerry Williams' murder. And without Brian Winchester, that wasn't going to happen. So they provide immunity to Brian Winchester so they can go after Denise Williams, who certainly, at least according to the testimony of Brian Winchester, was very much involved in the planning. This planning was established over a long period of time. It was very detailed. It wasn't a whim. It wasn't the heat of passion. This was a planned, premeditated murder.
Yeah, it's going to be. I was while we were watching, I was thinking about what it must be like to be that defense attorney. And these types of cross-examinations, as you watch, you think, well, this is going to be so much fun for the defense attorney. It's going to have so many opportunities to try to impeach Brian. But there's also so much pressure on that attorney who's going to be doing that cross right now, isn't there?
Well, there's no question, because this is their case. This is the prosecution's case. The testimony presented by Brian Winchester is putting this whole case together against Denise Williams. And so the cross-examination, because his testimony has been compelling. I mean, he's remembered in detail a lot of the issues that relate to this case. He certainly doesn't look as though he's making things up as he goes along, although the testimony is sort of twisted and bizarre. It's going to be very important for the defense to pick apart this testimony and show that this was a decision by Brian Winchester alone, because he had a relationship with Denise Williams and he wanted his best friend Jerry Williams out of the way.
Yeah, it's Mike Williams. Yeah, it's going to be. I think he went by Mike. It's when he talked about how Mike wanted to ring the bell for Salvation Army on that one particular night. I mean, he's really underscored, and how his dad, Brian's dad, dad loved Mike. You know, I think this jury has to be looking at this guy. I know I am, and thinking, what is wrong with you that you were able to shoot him in the head when he didn't drown because of the waiters? Do you think, you know, this is a jurisdiction, and this particular judge allows the jury to ask questions? I imagine, I think you'd probably agree, Matt, that they're going to have some questions for this guy.
Well, I certainly think they will after they get over the shock of what they've just listened to. You know, Brian Winchester said he spoke every day with Mike Williams, spoke with him every day. They were best friends. They did everything together. And then he's hanging on a log in the water after you pushed him in, and you drive by, you go by in your boat, and you shoot him in the head. I mean, how do you wrap your head around that? That is amazing testimony, and I think the defense is going to have their hands full trying to show that for some reason Brian Winchester made this all up.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. It's going to be interesting, though, if the cross-examination does not go as well as the defense might like. Does that raise the possibility that Denise is going to testify in her own behalf?
Well, it's always a risk to put your client on the witness stand in any situation, no matter how well prepared or no matter how truthful you think your client's going to be. It's always a risk. But sometimes you need, you know, if you're in a desperate situation in the case, you may need to take that risk, and that's something that the defense will have to decide as this case moves forward. We're
going to give you guys a brief overview of this case, which just began today and already has the key witness on the stand. So let's take a look at that overview.
A Florida woman is facing life in prison for allegedly helping to plot her husband's murder. Denise Williams is on trial for murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and accessory after the fact for her involvement in the 2000 disappearance and death of her husband, Jerry Michael Williams. Mike was reported missing in December of 2000 after not returning home from a duck hunting trip on Lake Seminole. A few years after the couple married in 1994, Williams is accused of encouraging her husband to take out 3 life insurance policies, totaling over $1.7 million. 2 of these 3 policies were signed off on by the victim's best friend, Brian Winchester. Winchester and Williams allegedly began having an affair in 1997, and according to interviews by Winchester, the 2 began planning Mike's death at least 10 months before he went missing. The indictment claims that Williams collaborated on planning the death of Michael Williams, who ultimately died at the hands of Winchester. William began filing to collect the benefits of the life insurance policies just 11 days after Mike went missing. A separate indictment on insurance fraud charges claims Williams reported her husband's death as accidental drowning. Williams and Winchester married in 2005 but split a number of years later. Winchester is currently serving 20 years in prison for a kidnapping charge in 2016 when he held Denise at gunpoint in her car for a number of hours. After he pled no contest to the charges, he agreed to provide information on Michael's death, implicating Denise in this twisted plot and taking investigators to Mike's body in 2017. Williams is pleading not guilty to the charges, claiming she had nothing to do with the murder. For Law and Crime, I'm Rachel Stockman.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, and Brian Winchester is back on the stand, so we're going to take you right back live to the trial. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network, ladies and gentlemen. And Brian Winchester continues to testify. It's just absolutely outstanding, amazing testimony. He's talking about killing his best friend, and the only time that he seems to get emotional about it is when he talks about his father. Matt, do you think that any of the jurors are finding this compelling against Denise? I think it's super compelling against Brian, but I don't see where the connection here against Denise Williams, the person who's on trial.
But he does portray himself as very cold. He is kind of matter-of-fact about this whole process and everything that happened leading up to the murder of his best friend and everything after that. Yeah. You know, he was clear that he planned this and right. that Denise was involved in the planning, and the planning was extensive. Yeah. And I think that's what the prosecution is relying on.
Well, let's go back and see exactly what he continues to say here. All I can say is, wow, that was some interesting testimony. I have been here at Law and Crime since we started, and I think that that was one of the most interesting witnesses I have ever seen. Matt, I want to bring you back in and get your overall feel for that testimony. How well did he do for the prosecution?
Well, he certainly laid out the plan, and he certainly, indicated, what his role was in it, and indicated that Denise was involved at the very outset and throughout this whole process. But it was really bizarre testimony, the way it was presented, the substance of it. He sort of created his own reality. Well, it's all right for me to have another woman, even besides Denise, while I'm still married, but it's not all right for her to go away with another guy. The jury, really, their head has to be swimming a bit. Of course, this was important testimony,
right,
and maybe the most important testimony in this trial.
Oh, for sure.
But they have to be just trying to figure out what they just listened to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's absolutely the case. We're going to go to a quick break, and we'll be back in just a minute. Just a small piece of some of the compelling testimony that we heard this afternoon. Matt, we've got a defense attorney who is now going home and has, 16 hours or so to really hone in on a cross-examination of this guy. What's the first area that you're going to focus on if that's you?
Well, the first thing I'm going to focus in on is his bias. I mean, obviously he murdered his best friend, so he has some incentive certainly to come here and blame somebody else. He's not even been charged with the murder. All that he's been convicted of is kidnapping. So certainly I'm going to pound away at his self-interest in being there testifying against Denise Williams.
Yeah, I mean, most certainly he's got the immunity deal, which is going to be, I think, an area of questioning. And then also, this idea about the gun. I don't know if I remember any testimony that she told him to bring a gun there that day. So there's just so many areas for him to go. And tonight's going to be a time for that defense attorney to hone in on all of this. Now, I know, Matt, you're going to hang around for a little bit to talk to Aaron Keller about this case a little bit more this afternoon. And tomorrow morning, bright and early at 8:45, they will be back in that courtroom finishing this really compelling testimony. Come back here tomorrow morning.